Good evening and welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Amanda Bowen. If you need to get your weather forecast outside of our show, you have a couple of ways of doing that. You can call 1-800-472-0391 24 hours a day, get a recorded version of the forecast, or you can visit weather.gov/Alaska, where you can find the latest 7-day forecast as well as plenty of other weather information from your local National Weather Service office. And of course, if you have any comments or feedback for us, please feel free to email us anytime at nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. Taking a look at the hazardous weather that we are expecting over the next couple of days, we have two warnings in effect. First is a winter storm warning for the lower Kobuk and Noatak valleys from 4 p.m. today to 4 p.m. on Friday. Expect difficult travel conditions due to heavy snow as well as blowing snow. Expecting 5 to 8 inches of snow accumulation, but localized places may see higher amounts up to about 11 inches. Also expecting wind gusts during that period up to about 40 miles an hour. That's going to be what's causing that blowing snow. We also have a high wind warning in effect for the Chukchi Sea coast north of Cape Krusenstern. So that's going to be for winds up to about 60 miles per hour from 6 a.m. on Friday to 10 p.m. on Friday. Those 60-mile-an-hour wind gusts are going to be capable of blowing around loose objects as well as potentially causing isolated power outages. There's a couple of things that we don't have on the map here, but are still somewhat of threats, just lower level threats over the next couple of days. The first is some gusty winds developing across the North Gulf Coast. That's going to be tonight through the day on Friday. So we're expecting our highest winds in the higher elevations above Prince William Sound up by Thompson Pass and Valdez, with gusts up to 50 miles per hour and sustained winds about 30 to 40 miles per hour. Those winds are going to be out of the north. And then for the rest of the Prince William Sound area, stretching west all the way around to about Seward, we're looking at winds 25 to 35 miles per hour with gusts up to about 40 miles per hour. So expect those winds to increase this evening and continue through Friday. Taking a look at our satellite imagery, we see plenty of clouds and moisture coming into the Aleutians as well as starting to come into the west coast today. That's going to be associated with a strong front that's approaching the area. We also have some clouds over the Panhandle today where we have another weak low pressure system coming in. But what you don't see is a whole lot of clouds over the interior and mainland of the state. So we're seeing quite a lot of sunshine and dry weather for most of the state today. Taking a look at our surface chart for today, we see that strong occluded front that's just starting to move through the Aleutians and into eastern Russia. That's going to be approaching the state over the next couple of days, but for today it'll bring rain into the Aleutians as well as the immediate west coast of the state, with snow starting up along the eastern Seward Peninsula and up to the Chukchi Sea coast. We also have that weak low pressure system in the northeastern Gulf that's bringing some rain into the Panhandle with snow in the higher elevations. We also have some snow with a trough coming off that low pressure system, snow over the eastern portions of the interior near the Yukon River where it crosses the Canadian border, as well as down into the Wrangell St. Elias Mountains. For tonight, we have high pressure in command over the interior portion of the state, but for the west coast, we have that front continuing to march east, bringing rain further east, making it into southwestern portions of the state with the Yukon Delta tonight, and some heavy rain and heavy snow over the Chukchi Sea coast area. That's where we have that winter storm warning in effect for tonight and into Friday for the lower Kobuk and Noatak valleys. Elsewhere, we have high pressure in command over the Alaska Peninsula still, although that's going to start to get pushed out a little bit more as that front continues east. And our weak low pressure system over the northeastern Gulf will have moved inland tonight, so expect drying conditions over the Panhandle. For Friday, much of the same for the west coast, with rain and precipitation starting to move a little bit further east, especially over the northwestern portion of the state. That snow moving into the western Brooks Range and parts of the North Slope during the day on Friday. We'll also see rain continuing for the Bering Sea as well as the YK Delta, and we have rain moving into the eastern Aleutians. For tonight as well as Friday, we're also expecting some elevated surf along portions of the west coast of the state. If you look at those black lines on the map, the winds are going to be moving with those black lines. So south to southwesterly winds, gusty and strong at times, are going to be pushing the water up onto the coast. So portions of the west coast with coastlines that face to the south and southwest from Tooksuk Bay all the way up to Point Hope. Again, those south and southwest facing coastlines, we're expecting elevated surf both tonight and through the day Friday and actually into the day Saturday a bit. And that's going to include both Teller and Brevig Mission, which are areas that don't usually see elevated surf during these types of events, but we do expect it to happen in those places for this particular event. So all of the usual places with that south and southwest facing coastlines, as well as Teller and Brevig Mission, looking at elevated surf starting tonight and lasting into the day on Saturday. Speaking of Saturday, if we look at what our surface chart shows us, that occluded front is weakening and it actually stalls out. So it's going to become a stationary front, just kind of sitting over the west coast of the state, bringing some continued rain to the coastal portions of the southwest portion of the state, as well as some precipitation along the Seward Peninsula and points north and inland from there. We also have a weak low pressure system, another one, coming into the northeastern Gulf. That's going to be starting to bring some rain into the southern Panhandle with snow in the higher terrain there. And then behind that stationary front out in the Bering, we are looking at a weak low pressure system out there that's going to be sparking some rain showers. But other than that, much more quiet time for the Bering Sea. Over the mainland of Alaska, we're looking at continued drying conditions, although we do have that high pressure that's going to be moving off to the east, so potential for some weather to make it into the interior later this weekend. Taking a look at temperatures for Friday morning, starting the day off chilly once again in the Brooks Range with our lowest temperatures just in the negative single digits. We're looking at single digits to teens for low temperatures on Friday morning for the North Slope, and warming as we get to the West Coast, temperatures above freezing expected Friday morning for the Seward Peninsula, as well as down through the YK Delta, where we're expecting that rain on Friday morning. But as we head towards the interior, cools significantly. So we've got 20s for the interior of the southwest portion of the state, and then single digits once we get into the central and eastern interior, with 4 degrees expected at Fairbanks on Friday morning. Taking a look at the North Gulf Coast, temperatures generally around or just below freezing, with a couple of exceptions right there on the coast itself, and temperatures in the upper 30s to low 40s for the Aleutians. Taking a look at the Panhandle, we're looking at cooling temperatures in the 30s to as warm as the low 40s for the southern Panhandle. Friday afternoon, we have temperatures in the 40s and even up to about 50 for the Panhandle, with 40s stretching all the way across the Gulf Coast and much of the way up the West Coast. Temperatures a little bit warmer for the North Slope up in the 20s to some teens for the eastern North Slope and upper 20s for the interior. Saturday morning, we'll see a cooling trend, particularly for the northern panhandle. As things start to dry out, it'll allow it to cool a lot more. So we've got 22 at Yakutat, 33 at Skagway, 28 at Juneau. Those are quite a bit cooler than what we're expecting for Friday morning. We also have continuing cold air over the eastern interior and cooling a little bit more even for southwestern and western portions of the state. Finally, Saturday afternoon, we're talking about that cooling trend again for the panhandle. High temperatures only in the upper 30s to low 40s for the northern portions of the panhandle. And even for the southern panhandle, a couple of degrees cooler than we've been seeing, with highs just in the 40s. We'll also see highs in the 40s for much of the Gulf Coast, as well as the southwestern portion of the state. And temperatures just a little bit warmer for the North Slope in the mid to upper 20s to even around 30 degrees.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to a look at your aviation forecast, starting with flying weather for Friday morning. We'll see some IFR conditions along the west coast, as well as stretching back through the Bering Sea and into the Aleutians. But the big story on Friday is going to be mostly VFR conditions across the mainland, as well as much of the panhandle. So for Friday afternoon, we'll actually see some improvement for portions of the west coast, although we will see some MVFR conditions developing across southern portions of the panhandle on Friday afternoon. For Saturday morning, still VFR over most of the state, but we'll see some MVFR and IFR conditions start to spread into the coast of southwest Alaska, as well as the Alaska Peninsula. For Saturday afternoon, we'll continue to see those MVFR and some IFR conditions spread inland into southwestern Alaska, with IFR conditions actually starting to come onto the coast near the YK Delta. MVFR conditions continuing to spread north into the Gulf and starting to impact the southern portion of the Kenai Peninsula for Saturday afternoon, and MVFR conditions generally spreading all the way back through the Aleutians. VFR at Anaktuvuk Pass and Adigan Pass, VFR at Lake Clark and Merrill Passes, as well as Rainy Pass, Windy Pass VFR, and Isabel Pass VFR. Mentasta Pass and Tanita Passes VFR, Portage Pass VFR, and Chilkoot and White Passes VFR on Friday. Taking a look at freezing levels for Friday morning, we've got a couple of areas of some warmer air moving into the mix. The first is coming up into the northwestern Gulf, into the Kodiak Island and Alaska Peninsula area, where we'll see freezing levels 2,000 to about 6,000 feet. Also a little bit of warmer air coming up into the southern panhandle, 2,000 to 4,000 foot freezing levels there. And then into the central Aleutians, about 4,000 foot freezing levels there. Otherwise, 2,000 feet along the immediate west coast, but generally surface freezing levels for much of the state on Friday. Icing on Friday, we are looking at one big area stretching all the way from the North Slope across the west coast and down through the Bering and into the Aleutians. That's going to be isolated moderate icing for Friday above about 4,000 feet. We also have an area that mostly includes portions of Western Canada, but is going to scrape the higher terrain of the Panhandle as well. That's going to be isolated moderate icing on Friday above 6,000 feet. Jet stream on Friday, we've got a couple of things going on here. We've got one big jet that's stretching from the Gulf into the coast of British Columbia, just south of the Panhandle. That's going to be peaking 130 to 155 knots out of the west and northwest. We also have a secondary jet just north of that coming across the eastern portion of the mainland and down through the Panhandle, 110 to 115 knots there out of the north and northwest. We have our second jet just south of the Aleutians, 120 to 150 knots out of the northwest there, and then a little bit of a secondary jet over the Bering Sea, winds out of the southwest there about 100 knots. At 9,000 feet, The pattern is similar but changes some. We still have our main jet south of the Panhandle, 70 to 90 knots out of the west in general. We've got a secondary jet just offshore the Panhandle, 45 to 60 knots out of the northwest and north. That's stretching up into the Prince William Sound area. And then we have another jet just off the west coast and over the Yukon Delta and St. Lawrence Island, 60 knots out of the southwest there. Also some increased winds across the Aleutians, 45 to 55 knots out of the west and southwest. At 3,000 feet, we can see what is a strong occluded front that is going to be moving into the area with this strong 60-knot winds at 3,000 feet out of the south and southwest, stretching all the way from the Aleutians up the Bering Sea to the Bering Strait and Seward Peninsula, and even up into the Chukchi Sea. So that's where we're going to see our strongest winds at 3,000 feet for Friday. And finally, turbulence on Friday. We do have another chance of isolated severe turbulence in the Aleutians below 4,000 feet on Friday. That is going to be associated with that same front moving through. Considerable moderate turbulence below 4,000 feet for much of the west coast and St. Lawrence Island, and considerable moderate below 6,000 feet for portions of the northern Gulf as well as the Panhandle. Stay tuned for more Alaska weather after this.
Howdy there, stargazers. Trace here to guide you through the skies. If you ask me, the Milky Way is one of the most incredible things that you can see in our night sky. If you head out of the lights of the city later this week, which you definitely should do, there will be a new moon and it will be prime Milky Way viewing. Once out in the dark, look southwest. You'll see two bright dots. Those are Jupiter and Saturn, and if you follow the line drawn by them, you'll end up where the heart of the Milky Way meets the horizon. Let your eyes adjust and eventually you'll spot the faint band of light stretching from the southwest into the northeast. That faint band is our galaxy. It stretches 100,000 light years and contains hundreds of billions of stars. It contains everything we've ever done and every star in the sky. Contemplate the vastness while you keep looking up.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and we have a special guest in the studio today. We welcome Amanda Terborg of the Aviation Weather Center. Thanks for joining us, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Amanda's flown in all the way from Kansas City, and for those of you that don't know, the Aviation Weather Center serves the lower 48 for aviators, just as the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit here in Anchorage serves all of Alaska. So I kind of wonder, what's the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City doing to help out Alaska, Amanda?
Yeah, you know, we do a lot of collaboration work with our sister station up here. Lately, we've been doing a lot of work, especially in the satellite meteorology.
Okay.
In particular, we have been looking at ways to better identify icing conditions in clouds, which is a big deal up here because, as I'm coming to find out, even though I'm not from here, you guys have a lot of pilots here.
We have a lot of pilots. In fact, when you say you can't get there from here, that's how you get there.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so with icing potential then, what's Kansas City working on?
Well, we are working on something that will help us, again, identify the icing in the clouds. You don't want ice on your aircraft. No. Not only does it add a whole bunch of extra weight to your airframe when it attaches to the wings and the nose cone, but it can also mess with your aerodynamics.
Right.
And in the most serious conditions, that can mess with it enough that you can actually crash.
It changes the shape of the wing, and that makes it sometimes impossible to fly, right?
It does, yeah. So we want to figure out a way to better forecast for that.
Makes sense.
Now this particular image is over Alaska. The colors here are a little goofy. It doesn't look like your run-of-the-mill satellite image.
Okay.
But the red is where you have liquid clouds and the blue is ice. But again, it really doesn't tell you a lot where you have icing conditions in that cloud. Because in those clouds there's little droplets and they're cold and they're actually below freezing, but they're still liquid. And that makes them sticky.
Okay.
So when an aircraft flies through there, those droplets are sticking to the aircraft and it can happen amazingly fast.
Right.
And so that's what we're trying to find. And there is a product called the Aircraft Flight Icing Threat that does this. And it's basically looking at the temperature of the cloud, and it's also looking at the size of the droplets to identify a probability and intensity of those icing conditions.
Okay.
And if you flip to the next image, this is a case from Juneau, Alaska, where this probably wouldn't have been the best day to fly around Juneau.
Okay.
Now there was an area of moisture that pushed south from the southwest up along the coast that pushed in a stratus layer. And in the stratus layer, there was a lot of those supercooled liquid drops, or a lot of stickiness.
Okay.
And so the flight icing threat was able to, in the pinks and the reds there, was able to identify where that icing was. Now this is really cool. You know, it's really cool to be able to identify that. There is, you know, of course, caveats to every product. Much as we wish it would happen, sun doesn't shine all the time, unless, I guess, if you live in northern Alaska during the summertime.
Right.
But we need that sun to be able to bounce off those clouds and to be able to see where those supercooled drops are.
Okay, so it's a daytime only tool.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, right now, of course, you know, we're in the era of advanced satellite technology, and there is a satellite that can actually use moonlight to see clouds.
Yes.
And so sometime in the future, we hope to be able to do that.
Okay.
Another thing that is a bit of a challenge is multiple layers of clouds. You know, you can only see so far through a thick cloud.
Okay.
And if it's thick enough, sometimes you can't see a layer of icing that's below there.
Right.
But even besides those caveats, this product has a lot of potential to help out Alaskan aviators here.
Well, it sounds like a really big deal, and something that forecasters at the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit could use probably on a daily basis, and especially in the middle of a really big storm.
Yeah, I would think so.
Do you have a really good success story in the lower 48 using this tool?
You know, it's a fairly new product, and so we're still evaluating it. But yeah, we've had a lot of cases where we have seen that it does tend to capture those icing conditions.
Okay, very good. Well, Amanda, thanks so much for sharing some of the very interesting satellite imagery and the tools that you're using there at the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City with us here in Alaska. People can probably find some of this information online, right?
Yeah, here is a website here. It's a page from NASA Langley, and they have this imagery as well as a bunch of other satellite imagery that you can take a look at.
Okay, great. And I'm sure our friends at the Alaska Aviation Weather Center and the unit will be using that in the coming months there with your training and your help there to learn more about that tool to help Alaska aviators any day of the year. That's wonderful stuff. So thanks again for joining us, Amanda, and we welcome you to view any of our Alaska weather facts on YouTube anytime at the address below, and we'll see you next time. And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And now we'll take a look at the marine forecast, starting with the sea ice edge. We haven't seen a whole lot of change in the actual ice coverage over the last 24 hours, but we expect southeasterly winds in the Chukchi Sea to push back that ice along the northwest coast, as well as melt some of the ice that has developed in the Chukchi Sea. So expect less ice in the Chukchi Sea in the coming days than what we're seeing right now. For the marine forecast for southeast portions of the state, for Friday, we are looking at some strong winds, with winds as high as 35 knots out of the north in the Lynn Canal area. Seas are going to be 3 to 7 feet for the inside waterways. For Saturday, we'll see those winds remain elevated for the inside waterways, still 35 knots out of the north for Lynn Canal, and still gusting to about 35 knots for the central inside waterways, but decreasing again as we head further south. Winds over the Gulf, though, on Saturday expected to decrease out of the east and northeast 15 to 20 knots. Over south central on Friday, we are looking at our strongest winds over the northern part of the Gulf, 25 to 30 knots out of the north, including Prince William Sound. A little bit weaker winds for the the west side of the area over Cook Inlet and just south of Kenai Peninsula, 15 to 20 knots generally for that area. And as we head into Saturday, winds coming down across the board, 10 to 20 knots generally out of the northeast and east. Seas coming down to 6 to 7 feet over the Gulf, 2 feet over Prince William Sound, and 3 feet for Cook Inlet. Friday for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island areas, 10 to 20 knots of wind generally, although we will see our strongest winds on the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula down near Cold Bay. We'll have seas 5 to 7 feet on the Gulf side of the peninsula and as high as 9 feet on the north side of the peninsula on Friday. For Saturday, winds generally coming down a little bit, 10 to 20 knots, seas remaining around 6 to 8 feet for the Gulf side and remaining 5 to 10 feet for the north side of the peninsula. For the Aleutian chain on Friday, we're looking at winds generally out of the south and west, 25 to 35 knots, with those strongest winds in the central Aleutians. Seas 7 to as high as about 16 feet on the south side of the chain and about 12 to 13 feet on the north side of the chain. And then headed into Saturday, the winds do come down a little bit as well as the seas. Winds 15 to about 25 knots out of the west and southwest, peaking about 30 knots out of the west for the western Aleutians, and seas generally 8 to 10 feet across the board. For the west coast on Friday, this is where we'll see our strongest winds, 30 to 40 knots out of the due south for much of the Bering Sea on the west coast. And with that, we'll see elevated seas anywhere from 18 to 20 feet out in the open Bering Sea, with 7 to 10 foot seas closer to the coast on Friday. But as the weather system passes onto the west coast on Saturday, we'll see those winds and seas coming down a little bit. Still elevated winds for much of the area, 30 knots out of the south and southeast, but decreasing as you get out into the open Bering, 15 to 20 knots. Seas generally coming down a little bit out into the Bering, but remaining elevated near the coast, 10 to 11 feet. For the Arctic coast on Friday, we see strong winds in the Chukchi Sea. Those southeasterly winds is what's going to be melting and pushing that ice back from the coast that we talked about with the ice edge. So we'll see winds 30 to 45 knots out of the southeast over the Chukchi Sea, as well as seas ranging from about 9 to 14 feet. And then for the North Slope, we're looking at winds 10 to 20 knots out of the southeast and seas about 2 to 4 feet on Friday. For Saturday, we'll see those winds and seas come down a bit in the Chukchi Sea, but still remain elevated, 20 to 35 knots of wind out of the south and southeast for the Chukchi Sea, and around 20 knots again for the North Slope. Tonight, we have that winter storm warning in effect for the lower Kobuk and Noatak valleys, and then heading into tomorrow, we'll see that high wind warning for much of the Chukchi Sea coast. So remain weather aware because fall is here with active weather.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.